Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Simon Dillsworth is the UK Managing Director of Davies Consulting. You might remember Simon featuring on this podcast about a year ago when he was a director at the Ember Group. Davies bought Ember about 18 months ago, but they've only just recently merged all the teams together and started using the Davies Consulting brand. So it's goodbye to all of our friends at the Ember Group and hello to many of them again at Davies Consulting. Now, Davies has a background in insurance and regulated industries, and the consulting division is focused on innovative solutions such as intelligent automation, and that's exactly what Simon's going to be talking about on CX Files this week. So our focus in this interview is how do you strike a balance between the cost of intelligent automation and how it can help drive customer loyalty. Okay, so let's go straight to the interview with Simon Dillsworth. Right, Simon, intelligent automation is very much in the news at the moment because we've seen a lot of companies exploring post-COVID digital transformation. Sometimes it's an acceleration of plans they already had, and sometimes it's new opportunities. Are you seeing any specific type of company or industry that's really going faster than others and looking at this first?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mark. And I think it's probably best to start with understanding what we mean by digital transformation. And certainly in our experience, there's so many different definitions in the market. And if we look at the way in which Davies Consulting views this, we talk about digital transformation being about the orchestration of four key elements of a typical CX operating model. Those being people in the contact center, the processes that those advisors are using to provide service, any technology platforms that underpin the service delivery, and then any partnerships or typically outsourced partners who may be providing all of the aforementioned. And it's actually how well you orchestrate the interrelation of those four elements that ultimately drives the outcomes. And that's where we would define digital transformation in its truest sense. However, in the market, you do see a tendency towards assuming that digital transformation equals automation. So I think if we stick with the Davies definition, what we're definitely seeing in the market is an increasing volume of dialogue with retail clients, utility clients, financial services clients, and distribution. And I think the companies that are getting ahead in this space are those that are stepping back from the rush to automate. So going back to those two definitions we talked about, and the companies that are now stepping back from this and realizing that it's more about the outcomes you're trying to deliver rather than the impact of the technology, we're seeing a definite shift in their thinking. So more specifically, it's stepping back and saying, do we understand the true nature of our demand in terms of contacts? And when we look at our contacts, do we understand why customers are contacting us, what they're trying to achieve, and what the intent is behind the contact? Because until you do that, it's very difficult to then build strategies for how technology will play a role in transforming the experience. So particularly within retail, to pull out one example, we're certainly seeing more conversations in that space where there's some frustration with the experience with, for example, chatbots, which have underwhelmed massively across most verticals, but particularly in retail. And they're now looking more forensically at that demand. And, what they're particularly doing well now with support of companies like Davies, for example, is actually segmenting down that demand more effectively. So not only understanding why the contacts are coming in and the intent behind it, but also answering the critical question, which is, what do we understand about their preferences? If they had a choice, how would they like to conduct their relationship with us as a brand? And then putting a second lens on that, which is, okay, well, that's our internal understanding of our customers. What can we learn from the outside market? And it's the companies that are bringing that new focus on understanding the outcome and the intent who we believe are going to be and will continue to be more successful with transformation because they bring together the sum of the parts rather than just focusing on tech.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned chatbots and the sort of negative experience there, because I think that if I talk about customer service automation, most people would make an assumption that I'm talking about chatbots. And if I ask for 10 different opinions on chatbots, I'll probably get 11 negative stories. So, what are the use cases then that you've seen in this area that have impressed you?
I think that there are lots of use cases that we can refer to. I mean, Amazon is often held up as the gold standard within the automation space, and I think rightly so. And best example that I always like to refer to, probably because I can sort of use personal experience when I'm talking about it is think about when you're trying to achieve or make a return of a product with Amazon. So, you go back 10, 15 years, you and I would have been stuck on a phone queue. You'd finally get through to an IVR, you battle your way through the IVR. You then get to an advisor who, well-meaning and well-intended, then has to rehash everything about you and your account and has to ask you a million questions about the product. And then you get bounced to someone else because invariably they can't solve the problem. And you contrast that to the Amazon experience today, where if I have a problem with a product, I can go straight into the app. I can identify the product. I can click a link that says do a return. It automatically puts me into a chat conversation. And then the first few interactions are clearly with a chatbot. But then at some point in the conversation where it's pretty clear that I do need human help, the system automatically flags that. And I'm joined by an advisor who, again, can pick up the account details, the product details on screen and solve the query. And for us, and as Davies Consulting, as we consider the sorts of approaches to digital transformation, that's a really good example of a customer not focusing just on the problem and using tech to make it more efficient. Is actually stepping back and saying, what do we understand about the returns process? Where are the frustrations and the frictions in that journey? And how do we redesign it and then find a role for technology to make things better? So there's a classic example of advisors being well trained to be able to know when to intervene and how to solve the problem. You've got a chatbot that was doing a really good job of just getting the basics of the account information ready. And I didn't have to call the contact center once. So you've got the perfect balance there of people, process, platforms, and technology all working in unison to give me, the customer, the outcome I need. And that's where we'll continue to see, I think, some really winning use cases across all verticals who take that approach.
Yeah, and most of the time when we think about this, we're focusing on just the customer experience only, or the customer interface maybe. But is there an opportunity to use this same sort of approach and technology to actually improve the life of the agent in the center, the call center agent?
Absolutely. I think it's hugely underutilized and underexploited as an opportunity. And, we think that intelligent automation, in the way that Davies would define it, has a critical role to play here. And, again, if we use some examples, so within financial services, a really typical use case are customers calling in to solve an issue. So it could be to change some account details. It could be to activate a new card. And one of the common challenges within FS are advisors who are trying to resolve a customer's issue, but because they are dealing with so many disparate legacy systems, their ability to do this, to resolve the issue and to do it quickly, is actually highly constrained. So I think in the extreme examples where customers have gone down the tech first, automate first route, the immediate solution to this is let's rip out the systems. Let's go for some, huge multi-year re-platforming program that's going to change everything. And actually, I think the dialogue has moved on very, very drastically, certainly in the last 2 to 3 years, where there's a lot of challenge to that. You don't need to rip out all of your legacy systems anymore, because through the use of smart tech, i.e. intelligent automation as we would define it, now you can set up digital workers. And digital workers can be doing all of the work in the background of pulling data from multiple disparate systems and presenting that back to the advisor. So what bearing does that have on the employee? Well, how frustrating is it as a contact center advisor when you're trying to provide service, you're under service level pressure, and you're measured on the quality of your outputs, but you're constrained by systems. So there's only so much that you can continue to do that. You will begin to get frustrated. Your performance probably will dip because you're unable to address these things. And ultimately, you'll leave. So there's a real significant issue about the quality of the service that your people can provide, which is directly linked to the way in which automation is used. So again, in a world where digital workers are employed, for example, you don't have to rip out lots of legacy systems. You just have to find smart ways to get the data in front of an individual. And the more they do that, the more the service is good for the customer. It's better for the individual. The rewards are better. So it's a win-win across the service value chain if we use intelligent technology smartly.
And how do we balance the potential for intelligent automation? What is possible with this technology and with what customers actually want? Because, I know that every customer service survey or research that I see, when asked, the customers will always say that they want a human to respond to them first. So how do you balance that, those survey responses with what we can actually do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it comes back to, again, how we as Davies Consulting position ourselves pretty uniquely within the market. So we believe all digital transformation starts with understanding demand. So the opening statement I made about investing the time, not just to take standard disposition code reports or rely on MI reports that invariably have their limitations, and really look at your contact data and start to segment it by customers and personas. Because until you do that, you don't really understand what your different customer segments are trying to achieve and how they would prefer to undertake that relationship with you if they were given the choice. So, on the one hand, automation is great because it'd be very easy to say, here's a process. We don't need someone to call us, so let's use a chatbot. Now, that's all well and good if it's a pretty low value interaction and the expectations of the customer are pretty low. They just want to get it done and done quickly. And of course, if the chatbot works. But what we tend to see is chatbots are very poorly set up. They're not well maintained. So the customer is trying to use the technology, failing, and ultimately is being forced to call into the contact center, or worse, just doesn't even bother. So the opportunity that you have to add value should be driving your decisions you make around what is automated and therefore lower contact versus an opportunity to add value, in which case you absolutely want to encourage them to contact you via whichever channels that they choose.
Yeah, and that sort of brings me then to, because I was just thinking as you were talking there about some specific opportunities you might have where you're engaging with a human. It might be something like if a customer wants to make a complaint and the automation system just pushes them straight to a standard web form rather than actually having a conversation and engaging, because we all know the value of, complaining and talking to somebody, and then when that brand can actually do something, they can really turn around a situation like that. So are we maybe sometimes like over automating and maybe missing some of those opportunities to connect?
Hugely so. And we see it time and time again, and it's part of the reason why we've set up services specifically to help companies, particularly on the complaint side. So we have excellent managed service analytics that allow you to mine that information on an automated basis so you get scale. But the principle is that why on earth would you not want to speak to your customers when they're not happy? Because in a highly competitive environment, that's where the gold is understanding where your brand promise is failing and the gap that you have to address as a business, which will no doubt involve multiple departments across the CX value chain for the customer. So I think it's a path to destruction to simply automate away complaints on the basis that no noise is good noise and it's cheaper, because we all know that the companies that are surviving are those that thrive on the feedback and accept that there is obviously a cost, because there'll always be a cost associated with handling it. But the challenge for you as a brand is to convert those moments of dissatisfaction and frustration into moments of value. And, you and I, how many conversations have we had where, let's face it, part of it's been about venting. You want to speak to someone and you want to be heard. But that can very quickly change in conversation, because once your issue is addressed and you're comfortable the brand has listened and is adjusting, you're more open to listening to, did you know, Simon and Mark, that there are certain things in our service that you could be exploiting that you're not. Now, that conversation will fall on deaf ears if you're constantly trying to solve your problem with a web form or trying to talk to a chatbot that, quite frankly, isn't tuned to deal with the problem. So I think it's a huge, huge opportunity. And I think, again, there's a growing maturity in the market that's understanding that, contact is good. You just got to make the right use of that contact and act on it.
Yeah, and I mean, in my personal experience, what I've seen is when a company has that initial front end, ask me anything, and that is automated with a chatbot, it can be very difficult because the customer can literally ask anything. So how does it know how to respond? And conversely, when you're following a sort of standard procedure, like onboarding, opening a bank account for a customer, something like that, those kind of procedures where it's like A, B, C, check ID, etc., they can work really well. And you can clearly see that you can apply intelligent automation to that sort of procedure much better than a sort of open-ended question. So do you think that, we've seen some really bad implementations in the past, but do you think that people are finding where it works really well?
I think so. And sometimes you have to fail or underwhelm with your own projects to learn and move forward more positively. And again, that's where companies like ourselves are positioning ourselves to help clients. Because intelligent automation isn't simple. If it was simple, we'd all be getting it right. But there is an approach that says you've got to start with the intent and the outcomes you want to deliver, and stop being so constrained and focused on your technology architecture and what you can do and what's possible today. Because technology has moved at such a pace that it's almost negating the impact of legacy systems. So who would have thought we'd be sitting here to say, well, actually, no, you don't have to re-platform your estate. What you need to figure out is what are the data inputs you need from where, when does it need to go and at what points, and then make it happen. And there are lots of different technologies, whether it's digital workers, AI, machine learning, natural language recognition. When you put these together in smart ways, the impacts are really powerful. And this is going to continue to get better and better and better. You only have to look at the rise of Alexa and Google and what we can do in terms of voice commands to tell you that if you don't grasp this now and you're still focusing on re-platforming as the answer to all ills, you're going to get left behind. And the pace of change means that you can't afford to.
I mean, is that what you would say then as a final point? What we can look forward to in 2021 is this kind of intelligent automation has to become a fundamental part of any CX strategy then?
Absolutely. And, whilst intelligent automation was the buzzword, maybe CX orchestration is going to replace that increasingly, because, again, it's put the customer at the heart of what you're doing, make the bold step of designing around the customer and the outcomes, and then organize your internal resources to deliver that. And that will be in part technology, but there's a huge change initiative element here. There's people, there's processes that have to change, there's technology that may have to be used in different ways, and there are new technologies that will help to bring this all together. So the shift towards delivering outcomes as opposed to technical feasibility, and the shift towards orchestrating an experience based on a more scientific understanding of my customers, how they're segmented, what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it, has to be the recipe for success. And you only have to look at, Amazon as one of the greatest brands alive today as someone who embraced this years ago. So their entire mantra has been that the customer is what we're here for, and we gear ourselves around delivering the outcomes that they need. So the clue's in there somewhere.
Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.